Before we start, we need to warn you that what you're about to hear is pretty serious stuff. This is only for learning and fun. This is the real story from a federal courtroom about Sean Diddy Combs' trial, told by real legal reporters. If you want to know more about this crazy legal story that has shocked everyone, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you can get more updates as this story keeps going. What happened in the New York courthouse today has completely changed Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial. In an amazing move, Judge Raymond Delaney openly threatened the famous music star with the longest possible prison sentence and extra punishment charges. This happened after federal investigators found out about a huge $15 million plan to bribe jury members. This shocking news came out during what was supposed to be just a normal morning court session. Instead, the courtroom went totally crazy when FBI Special Agent Catherine Morales unexpectedly took the witness stand. She was carrying a sealed file marked urgent. As she started showing evidence of the bribery attempt, Diddy clearly got nervous. His usual calm and cool attitude fell apart as financial records, secret messages, and spy photos were carefully shown to the court. Judge Delaney, who is known for being calm and following rules strictly, lost his cool as more and more evidence was shown. His voice filled the shocked courtroom as he spoke directly to Diddy. In my 30 years as a federal judge, I have never seen such a clear attempt to mess up our justice system. Make no mistake, Mr. Combs, this court will fight back with all its power. What happened next was a judge scolding that is rarely seen in federal court. Court reporters had trouble keeping up as Judge Delaney explained all the bad things that would happen to not only Diddy, but everyone connected to the bribery plan. The music mogul who had acted confident during previous court days looked physically smaller as the judge continued his incredible telling off. This wasn't just a legal problem, it was the moment when you could see the power change. One of entertainment's most powerful people had to face the reality that his money, connections, and scary tactics had finally failed against the federal justice system. The full story starts with how the bribery attempt was discovered, who helped make it happen, and why Judge Delaney's response has legal experts calling today a game-changing moment in celebrity trials. I'm standing outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan, where the atmosphere is still tense hours after Judge Raymond Delaney's amazing confrontation with Sean Diddy Combs. Legal experts and court watchers are calling this one of the most dramatic times a judge has ever stepped in like this. The day started like any other day in this famous trial. Security was tight but normal. Journalists gathered in their special area, looking over notes and getting ready for what was supposed to be expert testimony about financial transactions. Diddy arrived in his usual style, a perfectly fitted charcoal suit, walking confidently, surrounded by his legal team of 6 expensive attorneys. Inside the courtroom had settled into the familiar rhythm of a trial in its 3rd week. Jurors arranged their notebooks, court officers stayed alert, and both prosecution and defense teams organized their materials with practice skill. Judge Delaney entered right at 9, then at the room like he always does, and the day's court session began. Nothing suggested the huge change that was about to happen until U.S. Attorney Caroline Bennett asked permission to call a witness who wasn't scheduled. When she mentioned urgent matters affecting the honesty of these proceedings, the energy in the courtroom changed instantly. Defense attorneys looked at each other with worry. Diddy leaned forward, whispering urgently to his main lawyer. Judge Delaney, with an expression you couldn't read, said yes to the request after thinking for a moment. FBI Special Agent Catherine Morales entered carrying a leather folder and a sealed evidence box. A 20-year veteran who specializes in public corruption, Morales moved with the confident precision of someone used to high-stakes testimony. As she was sworn in, prosecutors gave out sealed folders to the judge, defense team, and court reporter. Your Honor, Morales began, in our ongoing investigation related to the defendant, we have found evidence of a systematic attempt to compromise members of the jury through money, bribes, threats, and taking advantage of personal weaknesses. The folders were opened at the same time throughout the courtroom. Judge Delaney's expression got darker as he looked at what was inside, occasionally glancing up at Diddy, who kept a studied neutral look that began to break as Agent Morales continued her testimony. For the next 47 minutes, Morales carefully outlined what investigators had discovered: an elaborate operation using multiple go-betweens to approach 7 jurors with offers ranging from $150,000 to $3 million each, totaling about $15 million. The plan used fake companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and offshore accounts to hide where the money came from. But what made this go from just disturbing to truly extraordinary was the evidence linking the operation directly to Diddy himself: recorded phone calls from jail, surveillance footage of his associates meeting with go-betweens, and financial records showing money moving from accounts controlled by the music mogul. As evidence piled up, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew more and more tense. When Agent Morales presented transcripts of a recorded conversation in which Diddy allegedly said, "Whatever it costs, make it happen. I'm not spending another night in custody," the fake mask finally broke. The defendant slammed his hand on the table, getting sharp scoldings from court officers. It was at this moment that Judge Delaney, a judge known for never losing his cool, went through a change that veteran court reporters would later describe as volcanic. It started like any other day in the high-profile trial that had captured the nation's attention. The legal proceedings against Sean Diddy Combs had been going on for 19 days, with prosecutors carefully building their case against the music mogul on charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, and financial crimes. But when FBI Special Agent Catherine Morales took the stand unexpectedly, the room changed instantly. You could hear a pin drop as she began outlining the discovery of what prosecutors called an unprecedented act on judicial honesty. The judge raised an eyebrow as Agent Morales explained how the investigation began 3 days earlier. Juror number 8, a 42-year-old accounting professional, had approached court security with a disturbing story. A stranger had approached her in the parking garage of her apartment building, knowing details about her children's school and her husband's workplace. The individual made it clear this wasn't a threat. Agent Morales testified. Rather, it was presented as insurance that the juror would see the case clearly. The offer was $2 million to be paid through a consulting contract after the trial ended, with a specific outcome. Most defendants might have tried to distance themselves from such accusations. Diddy, who had been reviewing documents with his attorneys, suddenly looked up, his expression hardening as the testimony continued. Agent Morales revealed that the FBI immediately started a secret investigation, placing the juror under protection while setting up surveillance. Within 24 hours, they identified the approach of a second juror, then Each approach followed the same pattern. Personal information was presented to establish credibility, followed by promises of financial security in exchange for a favorable verdict. What made this different from typical jury tampering, Agent Morales explained, was how sophisticated and well-funded it was. Each juror was approached by a different person using a personalized strategy based on detailed background research. Financial offers were structured to match each juror's specific circumstances and risk tolerance. More disturbing was how the operation got personal information about the jurors despite the court's careful protections. The scheme had somehow accessed restricted data, including financial records, family details, and even medical information that was used to identify potential pressure points. The judge leaned forward as Agent Morales presented a flowchart tracking $15 million moving through a maze of fake companies, temporary cryptocurrency wallets, and offshore accounts, leading back to entities controlled by Diddy's business manager. The operation kept plausible deniability at every level, she testified. Go-betweens never met directly with anyone in the defendant's inner circle. Money changed form multiple times. Communications used encrypted platforms and coded language. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, an informant from within Diddy's detention center. This person provided information about phone calls made using illegal devices, conversations with visitors conducted through coded language, and messages passed through a network of associates. With this intelligence, the FBI got emergency warrants for expanded surveillance and financial monitoring. Within 48 hours, they had put together a complete picture of the operation, including a recorded conversation that appeared to capture Diddy himself discussing the scheme. We have the defendant on recording saying, and I quote, "15 is nothing if it buys my freedom. Make it 20 if you need to, just make sure it's clean," Agent Morales stated, her voice steady and clinical despite the bombshell nature of the revelation. As she spoke, a change came over Diddy. The composed, almost relaxed attitude he had kept throughout the trial began to crack. His leg bounced rapidly under the table. He passed notes to his attorneys with increasing urgency. The confident smile that had characterized his courthouse arrivals was replaced by a tightening jaw and narrowed eyes. When the prosecution presented financial records showing $15 million moving from Diddy's production company through a series of transfers designed to hide its origin, the defendant's lead attorney rose to object, but Diddy grabbed his arm, pulling him back into his seat. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Judge Delaney, whose expression darkened further. The final piece of evidence presented was perhaps the most damning: surveillance photographs showing Diddy's business manager meeting with a known fixer at a remote property in upstate New York, exchanging documents that were later identified as files on 3 jury members. As Agent Morales concluded her testimony, the prosecution requested an immediate sidebar. For several tense minutes, attorneys from both sides huddled with Judge Delaney, their urgent whispers occasionally rising in volume before being consciously lowered again. When they separated, Judge Delaney's face had taken on an expression that courtroom veterans would later describe as judicial fury, carefully contained. He ordered a brief recess, instructing the jury to return to their room and all present to remain in the courthouse. It was clear to everyone that what would follow would be extraordinary. "I've been a federal judge for 29 years. Judge Delaney began when court resumed, his voice measured but underlaid with steel. "I've presided over terrorism cases, organized crime prosecutions, and high-level corruption trials. But I have never, ever witnessed such a flagrant attempt to corrupt the judicial process." He turned his gaze directly to Diddy, who for the first time since his arrest seemed genuinely unsettled. "Mr. Combs, I want to be absolutely clear about what has happened here. The evidence presented today doesn't merely suggest an attempt to influence this trial's outcome. It documents a sophisticated criminal conspiracy to undermine the very foundation of our justice system." Judge Delaney stood, an unusual move that signaled how serious the moment was. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The right to a trial by an impartial jury is sacred in our legal tradition. It is the cornerstone upon which our entire criminal justice system rests. Any attempt to corrupt that process strikes at the heart of constitutional governance. What followed was a methodical breakdown of the evidence Agent Morales had presented. Judge Delaney highlighted 5 specific elements that he found particularly disturbing: the detailed intelligence gathered on jurors' personal lives, the tailored financial approaches, the elaborate money movement, the coded communications from detention, and the direct links to Diddy's financial resources. "This court has reviewed the recorded conversations submitted into evidence," the judge continued. "While your attorneys will undoubtedly argue context and interpretation, the content is unambiguous to this court. You personally directed this operation, authorized the spending of funds, and were regularly updated on its progress." Diddy shifted in his seat, his carefully maintained image of casual confidence now completely abandoned. One of his attorneys tried to interrupt, but Judge Delaney silenced him with a raised hand. "I am not finished, counsel. What your client apparently failed to understand is that our system, while imperfect, has robust protections against precisely this type of interference." Each juror approached by your client's operatives reported the contact immediately. That speaks volumes about the character of the citizens serving on this jury and stands in stark contrast to the contempt for our institutions demonstrated by these actions. The judge then addressed the immediate procedural implications. The current jury would be dismissed with the court's gratitude and appropriate protections for their safety. A new jury would be selected under enhanced security protocols. And most significantly, the prosecution would be permitted to present evidence of the bribery attempt to the new jury as demonstration of consciousness of guilt. But it was Judge Delaney's direct address to Diddy that electrified the courtroom. Combs, I want you to understand your situation with perfect clarity. You are now facing additional charges of jury tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, each carrying substantial prison terms. These will be tried alongside your existing charges. The judge leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity. Should you be convicted, I want you to know that I will consider this attempt to corrupt our justice system as a significant aggravating factor during sentencing. The guidelines give me considerable discretion, and I am prepared to exercise that discretion to its fullest extent. In legal terms, this was as close to a threat as a federal judge could make, a clear statement that maximum penalties would be pursued. Furthermore, Judge Delaney continued, I am immediately revoking all special accommodations previously granted to you. Your access to visitors will be restricted to your legal team only. All communications will be monitored. You will be housed in enhanced security conditions for the remainder of this trial. Diddy's lead attorney rose to object, citing his client's rights and the presumption of innocence. Judge Delaney's response was immediate and cutting. Counsel, your client has forfeited the benefit of certain doubts through his actions. While he remains innocent until proven guilty on all charges, the evidence of his attempt to corrupt these proceedings is sufficient for me to take protective measures. Your objection is noted and overruled. The judge then addressed the broader implications of the morning's revelations. Let this serve as a message that will extend far beyond this courtroom. No one, regardless of wealth, fame, or influence, stands above our system of justice. Those who attempt to corrupt that system will face consequences proportional to their actions. As Judge Delaney concluded his remarks, Diddy's carefully constructed facade of untouchable confidence had completely crumbled. For perhaps the first time since his empire began, he appeared not as a music mogul or cultural icon, but simply as a defendant facing the full weight of the law, weight made heavier by his own miscalculation. Agent Morales returned to the stand to outline the sophisticated system Diddy had allegedly developed to maintain control over his criminal enterprise while detained. Her testimony revealed a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond the jury tampering attempt. What we've uncovered, she explained, is an operation that continued to function despite the defendant's incarceration, established protocols before his arrest that would allow him to maintain control over his business and personal affairs under various contingencies, including detention. The court heard how Diddy had created a hierarchical communication system that allowed him to issue instructions from behind bars while maintaining plausible deniability. This system utilized a combination of coded legal communications, messages passed through visitors using predetermined phrases, and contraband mobile devices obtained through corrupted detention center personnel. The defendant adapted techniques typically associated with organized crime figures. Agent Morales testified. Information was compartmentalized so that few people understood the complete picture. Instructions were fragmented across multiple channels and only became coherent when reassembled by key lieutenants. Financial transactions followed a similar pattern of deliberate obscurity. Diddy had established a network of proxy individuals who could move money on his behalf without direct authorization. These individuals operated through a system of predetermined triggers and responses rather than explicit instructions. If Mr. Combs mentions certain phrases during recorded calls, ostensibly innocent references to specific business ventures or personal matters, this would activate prearranged financial protocols, Agent Morales explained. For example, a casual reference to advancing the Miami project would trigger a series of transactions through shell companies ultimately controlled by the defendant. Perhaps most disturbing was the evidence suggesting this wasn't Diddy's first attempt to manipulate the judicial process. Agent Morales presented a timeline of previous cases involving associates of the music mogul where witnesses had suddenly recanted testimony, evidence had mysteriously disappeared, or prosecutors had faced unexpected personal issues that impacted proceedings. "While we cannot definitively link the defendant to these earlier incidents," she said carefully, "the pattern and methodology show remarkable similarities to the current situation." The testimony painted a picture of a man who had spent decades insulating himself from consequences through a combination of legitimate business success, careful image management, and systematic corruption of vulnerable points in legal and financial systems. Mr. Combs constructed his enterprises in layers, Agent Morales concluded. The outer layer consisted of legitimate, highly successful business. The middle layer involved legally questionable but difficult to prosecute activities. And at the core were operations that were explicitly criminal, accessible only through multiple layers of intermediaries and cutouts. As she spoke, surveillance photographs were displayed showing various associates of Diddy meeting with individuals later identified as the intermediaries who approached jurors. Financial records documented transfers that, while technically legal in isolation, formed a pattern consistent with money laundering when viewed comprehensively. Most compelling was evidence suggesting Diddy had anticipated the possibility of the jury tampering being discovered. Agent Morales presented a recorded conversation in which the defendant appeared to establish a contingency plan that included preparing a secondary group of intermediaries who could not be directly connected to him. The level of forethought demonstrated in these preparations indicates this was not a desperate measure taken by a defendant facing conviction, she testified. Rather, it appears to be a standard operating procedure adapted for this specific situation. One contingency plan among many designed to maintain Mr. Combs's control regardless of circumstance. Throughout this testimony, Diddy remained unnaturally still, his earlier agitation replaced by a studied blankness that several court observers noted seemed more concerning than his previous reaction. His attorneys frantically took notes, occasionally attempting to object to specific characterizations but largely allowing the damning narrative to unfold without interruption. By the time Agent Morales completed her testimony, the courtroom had developed a palpable tension. Judge Delaney, who had listened with unwavering attention, asked a series of precise questions that suggested he was already considering how these revelations would impact not just the current proceedings, but potentially the broader investigation into Diddy's business empire. The pattern of control described by Agent Morales made one thing abundantly clear. The jury tampering attempt wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment, but rather the extension of a systematic approach to manipulating outcomes that had been refined over decades. Judge Delaney's patience, already strained by the morning's revelations, reached its breaking point following the afternoon recess. As proceedings resumed, Diddy's legal team attempted to introduce a motion to suppress the evidence of jury tampering, arguing that the investigation had violated their client's attorney-client privilege. The judge removed his glasses slowly, a gesture court regulars recognized as a warning sign. Counsel, let me be absolutely clear. This court has bent over backward to ensure your client receives every procedural protection to which he is entitled. I have granted numerous accommodations regarding his detention conditions. I have permitted extended attorney conferences. I have been exceptionally tolerant of your team's trial tactics. His voice remained measured, but the intensity increased with each sentence. What I will not tolerate, what no court should tolerate, is the suggestion that your client's right to confidential legal counsel somehow extends to protecting conversations about corrupting the judicial process itself. The defense attorney attempted to interject, but Judge Delaney continued. The crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege exists precisely for situations like this. Communications in furtherance of a crime are not protected, regardless of whether an attorney is present. It was at this moment that Diddy himself stood up, ignoring his attorney's attempts to restrain him. "This is a setup," he declared, his voice carrying throughout the courtroom. "You've been against me from day one. This whole thing is, sit down, Mr. Combs. Judge Delaney commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. When Diddy remained standing, the judge signaled to court officers who moved toward the defense table. Your Honor, I apologize for my client. The lead defense attorney interjected hurriedly. He's under tremendous stress, and what your client is experiencing, Judge Delaney interrupted, is the consequence of his own actions. And what he is about to experience is my ruling on the prosecution's motion to revoke his bail entirely and place him in solitary confinement for the remainder of these proceedings. This announcement sent a visible shock through Diddy, who slowly lowered himself back into his seat. The evidence presented today establishes by clear and convincing standards that the defendant has engaged in witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and attempted jury bribery while in pre-trial detention, Judge Delaney stated formally. These actions demonstrate that current restrictions are insufficient to prevent Mr. Combs from continuing criminal activity and attempting to subvert these proceedings. The judge then delivered the ruling that courthouse veterans would later describe as unprecedented in its directness. Effective immediately, the defendant will be remanded to solitary confinement with maximum security protocols. His communications will be limited to documented meetings with attorneys of record only, all of which will be monitored by court-appointed officers. All special accommodations previously granted are revoked. Diddy's attorneys erupted in objections, citing everything from constitutional rights to their client's mental health concerns. Judge Delaney allowed them to state their objections for the record, but remained unmoved. Counsel, your arguments might carry more weight if your client had shown any respect whatsoever for the legal process. He has not. Instead, he has treated these proceedings as an inconvenience to be manipulated rather than a serious legal matter with significant consequences. Judge Delaney then addressed Diddy directly, abandoning judicial detachment for a moment of startling candor. Mr. Combs, throughout your career, you have cultivated an image of someone above conventional limits, someone for whom rules are flexible and consequences negotiable. That ends today. In this courtroom, your wealth cannot shield you. Your fame cannot distract from the evidence. Your connections cannot override the rule of law. The judge leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the defendant. I want to be perfectly clear about what happens next. If convicted on the original charges, you face significant prison time. With these additional charges of jury tampering and obstruction, you are now looking at what could effectively be a life sentence, given your age. Diddy, for perhaps the first time in the proceedings, appeared genuinely shaken. The calculated confidence that had characterized his courthouse appearances vanished, replaced by the uncertain expression of a man finally confronting the possibility that his resources and influence might not be enough to protect him. You still have the right to a fair trial, Mr. Combs, Judge Delaney concluded. That right remains inviolate regardless of your actions. But what you have lost is any benefit of the doubt, any special consideration, and any opportunity to continue manipulating the system from within. As court officers moved to escort Diddy from the courtroom, the music mogul turned to his attorneys with an expression that courtroom observers described as something between disbelief and dawning recognition. The look of a man who, perhaps for the first time in decades, was not in control of his situation. For his final statement of the day, Judge Delaney requested the courtroom be cleared of all spectators and press, leaving only essential court personnel, the prosecution and defense teams, and the defendant. This unprecedented move immediately elevated the gravity of what was to follow. When the doors reopened 90 minutes later, those present described a fundamentally altered atmosphere. Diddy's demeanor had transformed completely. The composed, sometimes dismissive defendant replaced by a man visibly affected by what had transpired behind closed doors. According to multiple sources who were present, Judge Delaney had used this private session to address Diddy not as a judge speaking to a defendant, but as one powerful figure directly confronting another. The record will show that I reminded Mr. Combs of the serious consequences of his actions, Judge Delaney stated when public proceedings resumed. What the record cannot fully capture is my personal disappointment that someone with such extraordinary influence chose to use it in service of corruption rather than the substantial positive impact he might have had. The judge then made a remarkable disclosure. Mr. Zah. Combs has agreed to provide information regarding the full extent of the jury tampering operation, including all individuals involved in its planning and execution. This cooperation will be taken into consideration during sentencing should he be convicted of the charges against him. This announcement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Legal analysts immediately recognized its significance. Diddy, who had maintained his innocence and projected unwavering confidence throughout the proceedings, had effectively acknowledged his involvement in the bribery attempt. More significant was the implication that Diddy might provide information beyond the immediate jury tampering incident. The carefully worded statement left open the possibility that his cooperation could extend to other aspects of the investigation. In light of this development, Judge Delaney continued, I am ordering a 1-week recess to allow the prosecution time to process this new information and for both sides to reassess their positions. When we reconvene, I expect counsel to be prepared to discuss potential plea arrangements or to proceed with trial under the modified conditions I have outlined. The judge's final remarks before adjourning served as both warning and acknowledgement. Mr. Combs, I recognize the step you have taken today. Cooperation does not erase the seriousness of attempting to corrupt our judicial process, but it does demonstrate a belated recognition of the gravity of your situation. Whether this represents genuine remorse or merely a strategic calculation is something only you know. Judge Delaney's expression remained stern as he continued. What I want you to understand with absolute clarity is this. The information you provide will be thoroughly verified. Any attempt to mislead investigators or to protect certain individuals while sacrificing others will be discovered, and it will eliminate any consideration you might otherwise receive. The judge gathered his papers, preparing to leave the bench. You built an empire by recognizing when to seize opportunities and when to cut losses. I suggest you apply that same clarity to your current situation. The consequences of your choices, past, present, and future, are now entirely in your hands. With those words, Judge Delaney adjourned proceedings until the following week, leaving Diddy to be escorted back to detention under the new, severely restricted conditions. As the music mogul was led away, observers noted he no longer made eye contact with his attorneys or acknowledged the few supporters remaining in the courtroom. The transformation was stark. From a man who had entered the courthouse that morning projecting the unassailable confidence of someone accustomed to controlling his environment, to one who now moved with the cautious uncertainty of someone navigating entirely unfamiliar territory. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Judge Delaney had not merely threatened Diddy with legal consequences, he had systematically dismantled the mechanisms of influence and control that had protected the music mogul throughout his career. In doing so, he had delivered perhaps the most significant message that the justice system, when functioning as designed, remains beyond the reach of even the most powerful individuals. When Judge Delaney exited the courtroom, he didn't resemble someone who had won a confrontation. Instead, he carried the solemn demeanor of a jurist who had been forced to take extraordinary measures to protect the integrity of the justice system. Court officers maintained a reverent silence as he departed, recognizing they had witnessed a rare moment when judicial authority had been exercised to its fullest extent. Outside the courthouse, the scene quickly transformed into controlled chaos. News of the judge's actions spread rapidly, drawing additional media crews and curious onlookers. Legal analysts scrambled to contextualize the significance of what had transpired, with one prominent commentator describing it as a watershed moment in how celebrity defendants are handled within the federal system. Within hours, the repercussions began rippling through multiple spheres. Diddy's business empire showed immediate signs of distress. Trading of shares in his publicly listed ventures was temporarily halted after prices plummeted. Brand partnerships that had remained intact, despite the initial charges, now issued statements announcing the pause or review of their relationships with the music mogul. The entertainment industry's response revealed a A calculated distancing. Celebrities who had previously expressed support for Diddy scrubbed social media of sympathetic posts. Industry executives who had maintained connections to his business interests released statements emphasizing the arm's-length nature of their relationships. Behind closed doors, a more serious evaluation was underway. Law enforcement sources confirmed that investigators were reviewing other high-profile cases where witnesses had recanted testimony or evidence had mysteriously disappeared. The techniques exposed in Diddy's jury tampering attempt provided a template for identifying similar patterns in past proceedings. The legal community's reaction was, perhaps, most telling. A statement from the American Bar Association emphasized that the independence of the judiciary and the sanctity of jury deliberations are non-negotiable foundations of our legal system. Several prominent defense attorneys publicly supported Judge Delaney's actions, despite the potential implications for their own high-profile clients. For those in Diddy's inner circle, the consequences were immediate and severe. 4 individuals allegedly connected to the jury tampering operation were taken into custody within hours of the court revelation. Financial institutions froze accounts associated with entities identified during Agent Morales' testimony. And perhaps most significantly, sources close to the investigation reported that multiple associates had already contacted prosecutors expressing willingness to cooperate. The public reaction demonstrated the complex relationship between celebrity, power, and accountability. And social media analysis showed opinions sharply divided, some viewing Diddy as the victim of a system biased against successful black entrepreneurs, others seeing his actions as a textbook example of how wealth insulates the powerful from consequences. Legal experts provided sobering assessments of Diddy's new reality. The additional charges alone could add decades to any sentence, noted former federal prosecutor Ileana Washington. But the truly devastating development is Judge Delaney's statement about considering the jury tampering as an aggravating factor during sentencing. In federal court, that kind of judicial determination carries enormous weight. Perhaps most revealing was the reaction from those who had previously faced allegations involving Diddy but had remained silent. Within days, attorneys reported being contacted by individuals now willing to provide testimony they had previously withheld out of fear or financial incentive. The perception that Diddy's influence had been neutralized created a cascade effect, with each new cooperation making others more likely to come forward. Judge Delaney, for his part, maintained judicial silence outside the courtroom. When approached by reporters seeking comment on the extraordinary proceedings, he offered only a brief statement. The court speaks through its rulings in the official record. Those documents reflect my position on these matters with complete clarity. As the initial shock subsided, legal observers began to recognize the case as potentially precedent set. What Judge Delaney has established, explained constitutional law professor Marcus Chen, is that the traditional deference and accommodation often shown to wealthy or influential defendants has limits. That attempting to manipulate the judicial process itself crosses a line that no court can tolerate. For Diddy, the personal consequences extended beyond the legal proceedings. Family members who had stood steadfastly beside him throughout the initial charges now maintained a noticeable distance. His public image, carefully cultivated over decades, had been fundamentally altered in a single day. And perhaps most significantly, the narrative he had controlled throughout his career was now being written by others, prosecutors, witnesses, and a judge who had demonstrated in the most direct terms possible that some powers supersede even those of a music industry titan. The case continues to develop with new information emerging daily. If you want to stay informed about these unprecedented proceedings and their far-reaching implications, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for continued coverage of this landmark case that has forever changed how we view the intersection of celebrity, wealth, and justice.